welcome to the Geek Legion of Doom, and it's Halloween. Happy Halloween. So, for Halloween, I thought I would do my 31 favourite horror movies. 31, of course, being the days in October. Now, this, I have to point out, is going to be my favourite, not necessarily what I think is critically the best. For example, you will not see The Exorcist in here. I think The Exorcist is a better movie than many of these films that I'm going to show you on this list. However, these are films that I simply enjoy more, not what I think is critically the best movie. So that being said, let's crack on and go through the 31 of my favourite horror films. The first one is the original Warlock. This is a German steelbook which has got all three movies on there. And this, of course, stars Julian Sands and Richard E. Grant, and is a fabulous kind of horror movie with a warlock. Not something you see many of, to be honest with you. Not really many warlock films, and I actually saw this one at the cinema, I believe. Anyway, great movie. So that was 31. Number 30 is Splinter, and this is a fantastic creature feature. With some amazing kind of practical effects. If you kind of like movies like The Thing, then I would be checking this one out. It's a similar in a way, with kind of like almost like a infection that it creates these kind of like body horror style monsters. It's a fantastic movie and well worth checking out. And that is Splinter. Next up is Waxwork, and this is a German media book, and this is a fun movie which has a variety of little different segments. We have a kind of characters kind of going into a waxwork museum, and there's various different kind of scenarios, including a Dracula one, is a werewolf one, and it's all kind of like fun kind of practical effects, and with lots of kind of like gooey, gory goodness, and there's some familiar faces on there as well. Including Miles O'Keefe as Dracula, and of course Zach Galligan, who you will know from the Gremlins movie. They did a sequel called Lost in Time, which I do enjoy as well, although I do prefer the original Waxwork. Next up is Wrong Turn, and I don't actually have a Blu-ray of this, so this DVD will have to do. And this is, I'm not a huge fan of slasher films. I would count this as a slasher film, and it's about a kind of a group of local inbreds that are essentially cannibals, and they're hunting various kind of teens and stuff. I just really enjoyed this one. It's a fun movie. And I'm sure you've probably all seen that. I still enjoyed the remake to a degree, but not as much as this original. And speaking of slashers, The Hills Have Eyes, the remake, yes. Some people may not be happy, but I do like some of these more modern remakes, and I do enjoy this one. And again, maybe a kind of class of the slash film, and in fact quite similar to Wrong Turn in many ways, where we have a group of people come afoul of some mutants, so to speak, and this is a UK metal pack. Next up is maybe one less people are familiar with, and this is Dagon. So this is based off the works of H.P. Lovecraft, and there's a very similar film to Resident Evil 4, the video game, if you've ever seen that. It's about a guy who is kind of having these kind of weird visions, and they kind of end up getting shipwrecked off this weird sort of like, I believe it's Spanish kind of coastal town, and the people there's something a little bit offish about them, is all I'll say. It's fantastically creepy. Some really kind of like fantastic location shooting and set design. It has some of the effects are a little ropey, admittedly, but I just love the atmosphere of this movie. Next up we have is Bad Moon. And yes, you will not find American Werewolf in London on this movie. Again, this is an example where I can appreciate American Werewolf in London is probably a critically better film, but I like this one. And this is a fantastic werewolf film. This is the Spanish Blu-ray, and it's to date got my favourite on-screen werewolf. I think the werewolf effects are fantastic. It's actually based off a novel called Thor, not the Marvel character, but about a dog. So you have a dog versus werewolf fight in this one, and yeah, it's got Michael Paré in it. He's kind of the werewolf. They make him kind of somewhat of a sympathetic character, which I kind of quite liked. And yeah, so that's Bad Moon. That's obviously the Spanish title there. Next up, we have the Vampire Journals, not the Vampire Diaries, mind. So the Vampire Journals is actually a spin-off from the Full Moon subspecies kind of franchise of films, if you like. This one is a low-budget version of a kind of an Anne Rice novel in a way. It has a similar feel to the likes of Interview with a Vampire and kind of Queen of the Damned. So if you like those kind of more romanticised, kind of like high society kind of vampire movies, but with the kind of the fun cheesiness of Full Moon low budget action, then then check this one out. And this basically has this guy called Ash who is a vampire himself, but he's like a self-hating vampire and hates the fact that he's a vampire and kind of wants to destroy other vampires essentially. And it's kind of a battle of wills between him and this kind of other master vampires. Next up, we have The Descent, one of the best, I'd say arguably, this is critically one of the best kind of modern horror films about a group of cave explorers who get kind of trapped in a new cave system that is inhabited by some subterranean creatures. This is a metal pack limited to 1,000 copies. And yeah, it's a genuinely kind of frightening film and fantastically well made. And this is Neil Marshall, who is the director of this. I think this is really the kind of the film that cemented him. He hasn't done a lot with it since, to be fair, but there you go. Next up is Zombie Flesh Eaters, or as this is sometimes known, Zombie 2 or Zombie. In the UK, it's Zombie Flesh Eaters, and this is the Arrow steelbook. Fulci's kind of zombie masterpiece. Yeah, I do enjoy this actually a lot more than the Night of the Living Dead films, to be honest with you. I know that again might be sacrilege, and I appreciate that the work that was gone into, especially like Dawn of the Dead, but I like this one the best, to be honest with you. I also like Burial Ground, which is a similar film. Another Italian gut muncher. Yeah, but you can't beat a zombie versus shark fight scene. I mean, that is to this day to be topped. Here's one I bet you no one's heard of, and this is the Dead Room. And I think this is a New Zealand film. It's got Jed Brophy in it, who you may know from some of Peter Jackson's movies, and it's kind of a Conjuring-esque kind of style movie about a group of paranormal investigators that are kind of hired to deal with obviously a haunting. And one of the things I liked about it, and it's kind of the same with the Conjuring films, is that these people act professionally. It's one of the kind of the bugbears I have when you see, especially like ghost hunters and paranormal investigators. They just like dick around the whole time, but I like it when people, if they're meant to be in their profession, they act like they are professional. And yes, it's a fun movie, a lower budget one, but I think it's very effective, and I really enjoy this one. Next one is The Purge Anarchy. This is by far and away the favourite at the Purge films. Arguably, you might even say this is not a horror. It's more of an action film, but obviously the franchise is known as a horror franchise, and there are certainly horror elements to it. But this is a great action movie in a lot of ways. I still count it under the banner of horror. And there are some, obviously human on human violence, kind of showing you the kind of the worst side of humanity. Is great, but it's got Frank Grillo as a character called Leo. So what's not to like, eh? A real fun movie, and I do enjoy the other Purge films, but I like this one the best. I'm a sucker for creature features, and to me, this is my favourite kind of crocodile / alligator movie. This one's called Rogue. It's an Australian movie. It's got Sam Worthington in it, although this was kind of before he really became all that well known. And there's a great killer croc movie with some fantastic effects. I think the final act is a little weak in this movie, but the first 2 acts are, in my mind, near perfect. And yeah, this is, in my opinion, the best killer croc movie. Then we have The Mist, obviously based off a Stephen King story, directed by Frank Darabont. And I'm sure everyone knows this one. It's renowned for having one of the most downbeat endings ever, but I liked it. I thought it was a good ending. And again, the effects haven't aged well in this particular movie, but it's very, very good. Next up, we have 47 Meters Down. And I love this film. This was a masterclass in creating tension, and in my opinion, is the best shark film outside of Jaws. You know, you have these 2 women that kind of go cage diving. Their cage kind of line breaks, and they end up kind of getting trapped in the sea floor with sharks all around them, and they're running out of air. So many things that are kind of like are of a danger, not just the sharks, but the fact that they're going to drown and running out of time. I thought it was brilliant. The sequel, not so much, but the first movie I thoroughly loved. Next up, we have Return of the Living Dead Part 3, and this is a German media book. And the Return of the Living Dead franchise is kind of a loose, alternate kind of sequel to Night of the Living Dead. Some might say the unofficial sequels, so to speak. And then these films don't really follow on as much, but they're kind of separate stories within the same kind of continuity, I suppose. And this one was an attempt to have the zombie as the main character, played by Mindy Clark here as Julie, and it's meant to be a love story where this guy can't cope, his girlfriend's died, and kind of brings her back as a zombie, and she's kind of trying to hang on to the kind of the last remaining shreds of humanity. Next up, we have Tremors, a seminal creature feature, and you know, we talk about maybe effects of you know, some of these films haven't aged well. This one, I think the effects are timeless, to be honest with you, for the most part. Absolutely an amazing creature feature, great comedic elements to it as well. Mega likeable characters. There's some incredible monsters. I think it's cheapened by some of the sequels that have kind of came out after this one, but nonetheless, the original Tremors is fantastic. So Werewolf again. So we have Dog Soldiers, and this is again directed by Neil Marshall, who directed The Descent. And yeah, I saw this at the cinema. It's a fantastic werewolf movie, and it's kind of like soldiers versus werewolves, and it's a simple concept, and it's a fun movie. And this was a media book by Koch Media, I believe it is, and to date has yet to have a Blu-ray release in the UK, and it's a British film, and it annoys me when that happens, but there you go. Yeah, it's a great movie. I'm sure most of you have seen this one. Next up, we're talking John Carpenter's The Thing, and this is the Arrow release. And yeah, this is a movie to me which is a 10 out of 10. It's near perfection in regards to how it's made, with good characters, amazing effects, and a really kind of like gripping storyline. I often get asked, oh, how come I never give a 10 out of 10? This one would be a 10 out of 10. But there you go. So yeah, I'm sure you all know about The Thing. Next up, we have the original Evil Dead. This is the HMV Cine edition, and I adore the Evil Dead as a franchise. You'll see another one of these movies in a little bit, but the original film is still one of my favourite movies, and considering what was done with this meagre budget when it was made, is incredible. And obviously Sam Raimi has gone on to have, you know, a great career after this, and cemented Bruce Campbell as a cult legend. Next up is Blade, and yes, I'm going to count this as a horror film. Yes, it is a superhero movie, but it is a vampire movie as well. And when this came out, people didn't realise it was a Marvel film. Bear in mind, before the MCU, it's even before the X-Men and the Spider-Man film. So this was just kind of come out, and it was an action horror film, and it's fantastic. Arguably, I would say the Blade 2 goes into more horror territory. But I prefer this. I prefer the original film. I think it's a very, very stylistic film, and Blade is a fantastic character made by Wesley Snipes there. And I don't honestly know how they're going to top this one. And to be honest with you, this is going to be a case where I actually think they got it right the first time. Next up, we have the original Return of the Living Dead, and this is a kind of like a tongue-in-cheek punk rock horror film that introduced the idea that zombies eat brains. This was the movie that did that. The zombies in this one are a little more intelligent. They can speak, communicate, and have a bit more of a kind of use of their kind of motor skills and things like this. And the concept of this one is the zombies are completely indestructible, so you can chop them up and all the bits will still be alive and stuff, which makes it a real problem for anyone having to deal with them. These aren't just shoot them in their heads and they go down zombies. Yeah, I love this movie. Great soundtrack, loads of fun characters, and some great comedic sensibilities. Then we have to talk about Grave Encounters. This was the film that changed my mind about found footage. I was not a fan of found footage movies until I saw Grave Encounters, which really kind of changed my mind about it and actually made me quite enjoy the genre for the most part. And yeah, this was a great movie. The fun concept where we have these kind of like Most Haunted style kind of documentary filmmakers going into a haunted hotel and bite off more than they can chew, with some great scares and some good use of effects there. And then speaking of found footage, you probably would guess this one would be, if you've ever watched any of my videos, I harp about this movie all the time, The Borderlands. If you are from America, this is called The Final Prayer, however. So you will not find it under The Borderlands, it will be called The Final Prayer. Now, this again is a found footage movie, and this is like, unlike, say, Grave Encounters, which is a lot of jump scares and stuff, this one is all about a creepy, foreboding atmosphere that kind of builds and builds and builds and has a real palpable sense of dread on it. It is fantastic. It is a real, genuinely unsettling movie with a great ending and some fun characters, and that is The Borderlands. Right, next one. This is The Lost Boys. Again, I'm sure everyone will know, be familiar with this one. This is the American version of the Steelbook, which came out prior to the British one. And yeah, I love the movie. It's one of those great 80s films that I think is infinitely watchable. And I think young people now will probably go, oh, what is that cheesy rubbish? But I love it. And great soundtrack, great characters. And yeah, what more can I say? So yeah, here's a lower budget one high up on the list. Scarecrows. Some people count this as a slasher film. I don't really. This is more of a monster film, a haunting film, really. It's about a group of military criminals that take refuge in this kind of like really run-down kind of farm which looks deserted. However, the scarecrows are alive and they are hungry for blood. And this was like a really just creepy movie, which great use of sort of set up shots and things like this. You just have like the shots of the scarecrows, like with the kind of in the dark, with the kind of the wind going past, and the soundtrack and stuff. I thought it was brilliant, and yeah, I really, really love this movie. And again, this is a German media book. So I've mentioned 47 Meters Down, and of course I said it was the best shark film since Jaws, so that of course means Jaws has to be on the list. Again, this maybe one isn't counted as a horror film. I still absolutely count this as a horror film.
And again, this is another 10 out of 10 film to me. This was one of these films where I think it's really, you can't, there's nothing really can genuinely say that is wrong with it. It's fantastic. And again, it's mainly down to great direction, of course, and some fantastic character work by all of the actors involved here. Okay, this is going to be controversial. Fright Night Part 2. Yes, this movie gets a lot of unnecessary hate because it's the second part and it wasn't the same director as the original Fright Night. But I really love it. This is one of my favourite, favourite films. My fourth favourite horror film. I like it nearly as much as the original, and it's, to me, it has a little bit more variety than the first film, because you have a variety of different kind of vampires here, and the comedic element is played up a little bit more with this one, I would say, and you've got, again, some great memorable characters. The only thing I think that is a little less, it doesn't quite have as a menacing a bad guy as the first movie, but yeah, I love this movie so much. Brilliant. Okay, top 3 now, and number 3 is The Conjuring, the original Conjuring movie. This is an American steelbook. To me, this is like, this gets some critiques, I would say, saying it's cookie cutter, but I think it's a fantastically made movie. And one question I get see asked a fair amount is, what's a good entry-level horror film? This is a good entry-level horror film, because it's not overly kind of gory or violent. It's well made, has great performances, and is superbly directed. And if you want to get people into horror, you don't want to go in with Texas Chainsaw Massacre and things like other things I see get mentioned. You want to go in relatively easy and show that you can have good filmmaking and good acting. And The Conjuring is one of them. But it's just got a great atmosphere, and I love the scares in this movie. Number 2, and for a long time this was actually my number 1 favourite, but I have now since kind of made it to number 2. So The Evil Dead 2. I would say this is the film that really got me more interested in horror than anything else. I remember watching this, and I got it out on video. I was at my girlfriend's house back when I was about 18, and it blew me away. And the kind of the stylistic choices, Bruce Campbell's performance, the ending, I think, has the ending to the best ending of any movie, if you ask me. And the kind of like the foreshadowing of what happened in the ending, like earlier in the film, was fantastic. I adore this movie. Yeah, it's cheesy. I tried to let someone watch this who was a lot younger than me, and they didn't understand, but I love it. And that means my number 1 horror film of all time, and actually, to be honest with you, my number 1 film of all time is the original Fright Night. I've already spoken about part 2. I love this movie. I can watch this movie again and again and again and still enjoy it every time. Great character work. Jerry Dandridge, played by Chris Sarandon, is a fantastic antagonist, and even somewhat of a sympathetic one to a certain degree. William Ragdale as our kind of our protagonist, I think it's great. And it's essentially like a kind of a vampire version of Rear Window, but it is fantastic. And that, my friends, is my 31 favourite horror films. As I've said, I'm not saying these are the 31 best horror films critically made, all of this, but these are the ones that I personally enjoy the most. What are some of your favourites? Please do let me know, and thanks for watching. Bye for now.